Hello, this is Socially Triggered, and this is sort of like kind of a part two of my previous video where I was talking about the debate. I really want to focus on one major issue, and it's kind of related to the big issue that Biden brought up and that was sort of a defining thing about the Obama administration. And that was the whole idea of clean energy. And I kind of want to look at that rather than really the political element of it. I'm really looking at how do you achieve clean energy? How do you achieve reduction of carbon dioxide? And my background is actually I'm a physics major, and I actually understand a lot of this stuff on a more technical side. But for the most part, most people don't really understand how greenhouse gases work. They think, oh, it's like this carbon thing, and it blocks the sun, and it keeps heat trapped within the atmosphere and stuff like that. And that's partly true, but it's way more complicated than that. And that's one thing that I always get frustrated by because they always kind of put all of this global or climate change on carbon dioxide as if that's the only thing that is important to look at. And it really isn't. But there's a lot more important things and more impactful things. What people don't realize is the change. If you even want to say there has been a change, and it's really debatable how much change there has been, but the change that they are talking about is half a degree change from 100 years ago. That we're 100 like 1 degree warmer, half a degree warmer than we were 100 years ago. That's what this is all about. Now, the Earth has been much warmer in the past. Um, actually, been when it was warmer, it was actually more productive. If you think about it, just with some common sense, if the planet is warmer, it's actually easier to produce, you know, plants, and there's just more things that can grow in warmer climates. There's a threshold to that. I think in the past it was maybe 5 degrees warmer on average, and so there's actually a lot of room that the world could actually get warmer and still not have any negative impact. Actually, it would be net positive for the planet. One of the things that they've noticed is that with the increase of carbon is that there has been a greening effect. And if you do a search for global greening, you'll actually see that the world has become greener and actually better as a result of the increased carbon, because carbon dioxide is plant food in many ways. It's what plants need to grow. So it's one of those things that I don't really want to talk about that part of it too much, but it is kind of one of those annoying things for me because as a scientist, like a science background guy, I really it just seems very ignorant to me that they focus too much on carbon dioxide. But let's just assume that that's the big deal. One of the things that Obama was really focusing on was this whole concept of reducing carbon dioxide. That's what they're always going on about. He signed up for the Paris Climate Accord, and that had specific targets. So one of the things that the Paris Climate Accord had was that America would have to reduce its carbon emissions. I forget how much, but it was considerable, and it would be devastating to the United States. And the way it would work is it's really a corrupt treaty. Basically, the way it would work is if you overproduced, let's say you produced more carbon than you were allowed, because they would put caps on how much carbon you could have, what you could do is you could buy from other countries their carbon emission quotas. So it'd be this kind of like market of like how much carbon dioxide there would be. Okay. And the net effect would be that everyone would just produce as much carbon as they need, but then people would have to pay other people for that privilege of producing so much more carbon. And so it wouldn't necessarily reduce the whole carbon emission, but it would basically penalize those who do produce a lot of carbon and compensate those who don't produce much carbon. And one of the things with that is Russia, which is actually a pretty polluting country, but they have huge land area, and as a result, they have like a lot of carbon offsets that they can basically claim to be carbon negative, and basically they would be the net beneficiary of this whole Paris Climate Accord, because they could basically sell their carbon offsets to other countries. And it was just a big scam. And there was like things like where the dirtiest countries, China and India, wouldn't have to do anything. They could even expand their carbon emissions, and there was no strict guidelines that would actually prevent them from doing so. In fact, they would be the net beneficiaries of this Paris Climate Accord. So it was just a bad deal for everyone, and that's sad to me because I'm Canadian and we're still in this Paris Climate Accord. So, with all that said, let's look at what happened under Obama, and let's look at what happened under the short term under Trump. So Obama, he spent trillions of dollars on really developing the green industry within the United States, electric cars, wind, solar, all these things. And as a result, I think wind and solar and all these things, they produce it's a small percentage, like less than 10% of all the energy within the United States. I think it's 10, maybe around 10%. It's not much. And there's a huge cost to how much energy that they produce, because solar is very dirty as a energy source. It's good that it's clean, but it's actually a very dirty energy source, because you have to use rare earth minerals to produce the solar panels, and to produce those rare earth minerals, you basically have to mine them, and it's just a big messy process to make solar panels. Now, once you have the solar panels, yes, it's very clean, but they only last a certain length of time, and then you have to replace them, and then you're going through this whole dirty process again. So there is a cost, environmentally speaking, to any of these technologies. Now, the same thing happens with wind. Wind is even worse in some ways, because it even during its production, it is doing things that are very bad for the environment. They're just like wind, like I think of them as like carburetors for birds. Like they just these big chopping things that are like, as birds fly, they get chopped. It's like really bad for birds. Like millions of birds die each year from these windmills. So it's just not a good thing. And then there's a whole bunch of other things that are involved. They actually require energy in order to maintain the spin. And they have they're not very consistent, because it's only really effective when there is consistent wind. So wind turbines just haven't really shown to be very good. I think it takes like a few years, like three to 5 years, before they actually start being net positive in terms of the environmental impact, in terms of the energy cost to produce them. So yeah, just not a good system. And what happened was, during the Obama years, that was the focus: produce more clean energy, move away from coal and from all these other technologies, and move towards more green, what was considered green energy. And so what you have is, you have a situation where the energy that was being produced by these green energy sources was just not enough, and it had to be sort of balanced out with other things. And because there was no there was no interest in really supporting the what was seen as the dirty industries like coal and oil, there was no real compensation for them to produce better energy. Uh, what was happening was they would actually have to still produce the energy that they had to produce, and it was always dirty. Now, when Trump ran, he talked about clean coal. And it sounds crazy because we always think of coal as this dirty, really dirty kind of energy source. What most people don't realize is 50% of US energy comes from coal. It is a huge energy source for the United States. And what Trump focused on was, rather than saying, let's kill that industry because it produces so much of the energy that the US depends on, he said, why not just make it cleaner? Like focus on how to produce coal in a cleaner, more efficient way. And as a result of that, he was able to reduce a lot of the carbon emissions that was produced from coal fire plants and all these kind of things. And so what happens is, rather than focusing on producing like these new technologies that don't necessarily have things sorted out yet, he focused on just fixing the industries that actually were good industries, but just dirty, that needed to just be cleaned up. Another thing that he really changed under Trump versus Obama was Trump really focused on becoming energy independent, making the United States energy independent. And some of the ways that they did that was they focused on more the oil, because oil is just one of the best ways to generate energy. And one of the ways that they got not oil but natural gas was through the shale, so fracking and all this kind of thing. And what happened was through those new technologies that are within that older industry, he basically was able to get the United States to be energy independent. And that's huge. Energy independence for the United States is essential, because what happens is if you are less dependent on other countries, like if you think about most of the wars that happened in the last 40 years, it was all about oil. You look at like Afghanistan, Iraq, Iran, like all these things, it's all about oil. It was all people fighting over oil or fighting to control oil. It's all about oil. And when you are energy independent, you don't need to worry about those things. You let them do their stupid stuff that they want to do in those countries. You don't need to worry about it. But if you're dependent on them, well, then you have to sort of get involved and try to control them and all this kind of stuff. That leads to so many problems. And that was not only a movement that Trump did that helped the environment, because becoming energy independent really did reduce the demand for these other countries to produce oil, but it also allowed the United States to not have to be so involved with the Middle East, and that was actually a huge movement for peace. So these two things are pretty important for the United States and for the world, in fact. And as a result, under having done all these things, the carbon emissions in the United States actually dropped the most under Trump's term than they did under Obama's thing, even though Obama was focused on green energy. And a lot of people don't get that, but it really makes sense. You focus on the things that you're producing the most of, and you make them clean. Well, then you'll have a better environment. Another thing that most people don't really appreciate about Trump, but this is something that environmentalists should appreciate if they were actually honest about being environmentalists, is that Trump focused on two big things. He focused on clean water and clean air. And that means that he really tried to clean up the lakes and rivers and the oceans to make sure that there's less plastic in the oceans, less plastics in the rivers and streams, and he also just tried to make the environment cleaner. And that is actually more impactful in terms of everybody's lives than worrying about the amount of carbon dioxide in the air. More people will get sick or die or have problems because of dirty water. The plastics in our water actually are the things that are killing us. A lot of the time you can actually, they were complaining about fish, that they would open up fish and they would just be literally clogged with plastics because plastics get into the water. Now, what most people don't realize is that most of this crap that's in the water is from very few sources. It's from China and from India and parts of Africa. Most of it. They always put the blame on the United States and on the European countries, but really the European countries and the United States really don't produce that much waste. They filter it. They have much better systems in place that keep the water cleaner. And clean air, on the other side, is also another way to make the environment better. Clean air, means putting scrubbers on the stacks, doing things that will make the air fresher and cleaner and better for everyone to live in. And these are things that have direct impact, instant impact. This whole idea of the carbon dioxide is just so dumb on so many levels, because what people don't understand is the double effect. So one of the things that happens with carbon dioxide is, yes, it does act as a greenhouse gas. I won't deny that. Okay. But what happens is, as more carbon dioxide enters the atmosphere, it takes twice as much to have the same impact amount. So let's say you added, like, I forget, it's like 200 million parts per million. It's like really small amount of carbon dioxide actually in the atmosphere. I don't know the numbers right offhand, but it's a small amount of gas. Okay, let's say it's 100, just as a number. I'm not going to say parts per million, whatever it is, but let's just say 100. Well, and that gave you 1 degree or half a degree of warming. Well, to get to the next 1 degree of warming, you have to have twice as much. So another 200, okay? And to get another degree above that, you have to go again double. So another 400, so, and it becomes like that more and more. So it actually is really, really hard to raise the temperature by just adding carbon to the atmosphere because of this doubling effect. And that is a very basic explanation of it. I wish I had like the charts and figures and all that kind of stuff to really showcase that, but that's in a nutshell what is happening. So the fear of carbon dioxide is kind of overblown because it's really putting a lot of effort into focusing on something that really has a diminishing return. It's going to be less and less impactful. So it's better to focus on things that actually matter, like water and air. Those things actually matter, and those things actually impact the world in general much more. Like when you clean the water, well, fish and humans and everyone is much better off. When you clean the air, the same thing goes. It's just kind of common sense here. So another thing that Trump did, which is kind of brilliant, is he has this trillion tree project, and it's literally planting 1 trillion trees. And when you plant that many trees, well, you have a huge impact on the environment, and it's about clean air. It just helps. It's like trees are like the lung of the world. And if you have more trees, well, then you filter the air better. And Trump is very aware of that. He's aware of the science, and he is pushing for these kind of environmental changes. Now, these are things that are like tangible. whenever they talk about the other stuff, it's always these intangible things. It's sort of like a boogeyman. You can't quite see what's going to happen. You can't really tell. You know, that's why the Paris Accord was so stupid, because it really didn't do anything, and it didn't really. It had these sort of fakey, fuzzy numbers, and it was like not really real, not really something that you could tangibly see. Whereas with planting trees, you can say, look, there's a tree right there. There's a trillion trees right there, or, like some crazy number of trees. You can see that. Uh, this other thing just wasn't there. And that was the problem with Obama. He was really focusing on things that were not really tangible, were not really obvious whether or not they would produce any positive effect. For example, people always think about cars and how much gas they require, and how much of an impact that they have on the environment. And if you look at a gas car versus an electric car, well, you look at it and you say, oh, the greenness of the electric car is obvious, because there's no tailpipe, it's not shooting out carbon monoxide into the air, and it's just a much cleaner thing. But what you actually have to look at is, how does that electric car get its energy? Well, it has to be charged. So what you do is you take that charger, you put it into your wall, and you get your energy for that car. But where does that energy come from? Well, generally it comes from coal, which is actually less clean than gasoline. So, there's always a trade-off. The energy has to come from somewhere. Now, if people built more nuclear, I'm a big fan of nuclear, then that would be a cleaner source of energy. And you could power up cars without having to rely on coal or more dirty forms of energy. But as I said, Trump focusing on making coal a much more clean energy source was very wise. So this is the kind of situation that people don't understand, and I hope that this video kind of clarifies the whole energy and environmental decisions that have to be made. And Obama, for his credit, he was trying to do something that sounded right. Produce clean, green energy, and that should reduce the environmental damage you're doing. But it was very short-sighted. Trump has much more of a pragmatist way of doing it, and he has produced a better result by being a pragmatist. So this has been my video on the environmental decisions of different presidents and how it impacted the environment. I'd love to hear your feedback. I'd love to hear what you think would be the best way to solve the environmental crisis that we are facing. I don't think we are facing one, but that's for another video. And thanks for watching.